The Zenith Collective prided itself on precision. Across 14 star systems and approximately 200 inhabited worlds, precision had become less of a value and more of a religion. Their ships didn't just navigate hyperspace. They threaded through it with mathematical elegance that would make ancient Earth physicists weep into their slide rules. Their medical technology didn't just heal. It optimized, enhanced, and generally made the entire concept of biological limitation look like a quaint historical footnote. So naturally, when it came to marksmanship, they didn't mess around. Station Axiom 7 hung in the void between the Kepler cluster and the Andromeda trade routes like a massive steel monument to organized violence. It wasn't a weapon itself, that would be crude, but rather a training facility where the galaxy's finest warriors came to prove they were, indeed, the finest. The shooting range on level 43 had witnessed more displays of augmented accuracy than anywhere else in known space. If walls could talk, these particular walls would probably just recite hit percentages and make everyone feel inadequate. The range itself stretched for nearly a kilometer, because when you're dealing with energy weapons that could theoretically hit targets in different time zones, you needed room to work. The ceiling arched overhead in a dome of programmable smart matter that could simulate any environment from the sulfur storms of Titan 6 to the crystalline stillness of deep vacuum. Right now, it displayed a pleasant false sky, the kind of blue that Earth used to have before humanity discovered industry and decided atmosphere was more of a suggestion than a requirement. Along the firing line, various species checked their weapons with the casual confidence of people who knew exactly how dangerous they were. A Thoraxian, all 6.5 feet of crystalline exoskeleton and cold mathematical logic, calibrated a plasma rifle that probably cost more than a small moon. Nearby, a trio of Vorentine warriors argued in their clicking language about optimal firing solutions, their chitinous faces showing the kind of intense concentration usually reserved for doctoral defenses or particularly challenging video games. But the real attraction, the genuine star of today's informal competition, was Commander Vexthor of the Krillian Imperial Guard. Vexthor stood at his firing position like a statue dedicated to martial excellence and excessive self-regard. 4 arms, each more muscular than strictly necessary, checked and rechecked his twin particle accelerators with movements so practiced they looked choreographed. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world where everything wanted to kill you, and they'd responded by developing redundant limbs and an attitude problem. His exoskeleton gleamed with polished violet scales that caught the artificial light and reflected it in ways that suggested he spent quality time with grooming products. But the really impressive part, the part that made Vexthor worth watching, was the hardware. Neural-linked targeting implants traced silver patterns across his skull, connecting directly to his visual cortex and motor control centers. Probability processors hummed quietly in subcutaneous housing along his spine, running millions of calculations per second. Stabilizer nodes at each major joint compensated for involuntary movements before they even happened. When Vexthor aimed, he wasn't just using his eyes. He was employing a suite of technology that would make a supercomputer feel inadequate about its career choices. He was, by every measurable standard, one of the finest marksmen in the collective. And he absolutely knew it. Another perfect score, he announced to nobody in particular, reviewing his latest performance on a holographic display. 40 targets, 40 hits, average time of 0.03 seconds per acquisition. Really, at this point, I'm competing against myself. His companion, a lean Vorentine named Chakrik, made a sound that might have been agreement, or might have been the alien equivalent of rolling your eyes so hard you risk injury. Yes, Commander. Most impressive, as it was yesterday, and the day before that. Excellence deserves recognition, Chakrik. Of course, Commander. Vexthor was about to launch into what would undoubtedly be a fascinating monologue about his training regimen when movement near the entrance caught his attention. Someone new had entered the range. Someone who, by galactic standards, looked hilariously out of place. She was human. Now, humans had only been part of the collective for about 15 standard years, practically yesterday in galactic terms. They'd shown up in their primitive fusion drive ships, all excited about finally achieving faster-than-light travel, completely unaware they'd invented the slowest FTL drive in documented history. It was adorable, really. Like watching a child show you a crayon drawing and expecting you to hang it on the refrigerator of interstellar achievement. Since then, humanity had been playing catch-up with varying degrees of success. They were enthusiastic. You had to give them that. Also loud, reckless, and possessed of a disturbing tendency to solve problems by hitting them with progressively larger hammers until something broke. The collective tolerated them the way you'd tolerate the enthusiastic but poorly trained puppy, with patience, condescension, and careful supervision around the expensive furniture. This particular human stood about 5.5 feet tall, short by most species standards. With dark brown skin and hair pulled back in a practical bun that suggested she hadn't consulted any fashion databases recently. She wore a standard collective military training uniform that looked somehow both too large and too small simultaneously, the way human clothing always seemed to fit. No visible augmentations traced her skin, no telltale gleam of neural implants. She carried a weapon that made Vexthor do a double take. It was a chemical propellant firearm, an actual honest-to-physics slug thrower that used controlled explosions to accelerate metal projectiles. The kind of weapon most species had abandoned roughly around the same time they discovered that hitting rocks together made sparks. Vexthor had seen these in museums, usually with plaques explaining how primitive civilizations had used such tools before achieving enlightenment and plasma technology. By the ancestral voids, Vexthor breathed. Chakrik, are you seeing this? I am now questioning my optical implants, Commander. The human approached an empty firing station with calm efficiency, seemingly unaware of or unconcerned by the attention she was attracting. Other shooters had noticed her now, conversations dying as they watched this bizarre display. She set down a simple canvas bag, actual woven fabric, not even smart matter, and began removing magazines of ammunition, actual physical bullets, in the year 2847 by Earth reckoning. The anachronism was so profound, it bordered on performance art. Vexthor felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of amusement, disbelief, and the particular joy that comes from finding someone you can feel superior to. He strode toward her, his forearms swinging with martial grace, his targeting implants already sizing her up and finding her hilariously wanting. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the kind of polite condescension usually reserved for addressing children or very simple artificial intelligences. "You appear to be lost. The Historical Reenactment Society meets on level 18. She glanced at him briefly, her dark eyes betraying nothing. "I'm exactly where I need to be." "I see." Vexthor's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his kind. "And what, pray tell, do you intend to do with that antique?" "Shoot it. Here, on a range designed for actual military weapons? That's generally what ranges are for." She loaded a magazine with practiced movements, checked the chamber, and engaged the safety. Her hands moved with the kind of unconscious competence that comes from doing something 10,000 times. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Word spread fast on Axiom 7, especially when something entertaining was about to happen. Nothing brought warriors together quite like the prospect of watching someone embarrass themselves. Vex Thor's smile widened. This was too perfect. A human with a primitive weapon at the most advanced training facility in the sector. The stories would practically tell themselves. "Tell me," he said, leaning against a nearby partition with studied casualness. "Have you ever actually trained with collective standard equipment, neural-linked targeting, predictive probability systems, any of the tools actual marksmen use?" "Nope." "I see. So you're relying entirely on what, exactly? Innate talent? Luck? The blessings of whatever primitive deities your species worships?" She slid a pair of simple ear protection over her head. Actual physical sound barriers, not even sonic dampening implants, and chambered around. Skill, something about the way she said it, flat and matter-of-fact, struck a nerve. Vex Thor felt his pride prickle. Here was this barely evolved primate, standing on a station that represented the pinnacle of collective achievement, claiming to possess skill with a weapon that belonged in an archaeological dig. "Skill," he repeated. "How fascinating. Tell you what, human, I'm feeling generous today. Why don't you show me this skill of yours? Demonstrate these impressive abilities. I'll even let you go first." She looked at him fully for the first time, and Vex Thor felt a momentary discomfort at the directness of her gaze. There was something there. Not hostility, exactly, but a complete absence of the deference he'd expected. "You challenging me, Commander?" "Let's call it a friendly demonstration. You show me what human skill looks like, and I'll show you what actual precision looks like. Educational exchange between species, very collective-spirited." "Fine." She turned back to the range. "Standard targets, 50 meters? Oh, let's not insult either of us with something so simple. Computer, load program Vex Thor 7. Advanced moving targets, variable distances, environmental complications." The range shimmered as the smart matter overhead reconfigured reality. The pleasant false sky dissolved into a simulation of a combat zone. Urban warfare, buildings providing cover, targets appearing and disappearing at random intervals. Wind effects kicked in, making the air itself a factor. Distances ranged from 20 meters to 300. The difficulty level was something Vex Thor usually used to show off. Chikrik leaned close. "Commander, that program is designed for neural-linked weapons. She's using manual aim with a projectile weapon affected by wind, gravity, and—" "I know what it's designed for," Vex Thor said cheerfully. "That's rather the point." The human studied the range layout for perhaps 10 seconds. Then she stepped up to the line, settled into a stance that looked somehow both relaxed and coiled, and waited. "Whenever you're ready," Vex Thor announced. "Try not to embarrass yourself too badly. We're all friends here." Scattered laughter from the crowd. She raised the weapon, some sort of modified pistol, Vex Thor noted, with iron sights that required you to actually line up physical markers with your target like some kind of medieval mathematician. The first target appeared downrange, a moving silhouette at 70 meters. She fired. The sound was barbaric, a sharp crack that ancient chemical propellants made when they exploded. No elegant hum of particle acceleration, no subtle whine of energy weapons. Just a violent bang that felt deeply primitive. The target registered a hit. Center mass. "Beginner's luck," someone muttered. The second target appeared at 120 meters, moving laterally behind partial cover. She adjusted her stance fractionally. compensated for the wind that Vex Thor's instruments were measuring at 15 kilometers per hour from the northwest, and fired again. Hit. Third target. Fourth. Fifth. She worked through the sequence with methodical efficiency, her breathing steady, her movements economical. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Just aim, fire, adjust, repeat. When the last target fell, the range fell silent. 20 targets, 20 hits. With a manual weapon using projectile ammunition that was literally affected by physics in ways energy weapons simply weren't. Vex Thor checked the holographic readout, certain there must be some mistake. But no, the computer confirmed it. Perfect score. Her time was slower than what his neural-linked systems could achieve, obviously, but the accuracy was undeniable. "Well," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "that was adequate for a human. But you see, you were still using stable firing positions, relatively straightforward angles. Let me show you what augmented precision actually looks like." He stepped up to the line, all four arms moving into position. His twin particle accelerators hummed to life, their targeting systems syncing with his neural implants in milliseconds. The range reconfigured for his run. What followed was a display of technology in perfect harmony with biology. His processors predicted target appearance patterns before they manifested. His stabilizers eliminated any involuntary muscle tremors. His four arms meant he could engage multiple targets simultaneously, while the predictive algorithms were already calculating the next firing solution. It was, objectively, beautiful. Each shot was a convergence of probability matrices and quantum-locked targeting, every movement optimized by systems that processed information faster than organic thought. When he finished, his score was perfect, naturally, and his time was 0.02 seconds faster than the humans. "And that," he said, his mandibles spread in satisfaction, "is what actual skill looks like. Supported by technology, enhanced by training, perfected through augmentation. No offense to your primitive methods, but this is simply how modern warfare is conducted." She nodded slowly. "Impressive. Your tech did most of the work for you. The technology is part of the skill. We've evolved beyond crude physical limitations. Why would anyone choose to remain primitive when enhancement is available? Because enhancement becomes dependency. A charming philosophy, also irrelevant. In actual combat, I win every time. My systems are faster, more accurate, and more reliable than organic reflexes." She considered this for a moment. "Want to test that theory?" Something in her tone made Vex Thor pause. The crowd had grown considerably now. Word had spread through the station that something interesting was happening on the range. He saw Thoraxians, Vorentines, even a few of the usually aloof Silicate Collective, observing with their crystalline intelligence. His pride made the decision for him. "By all means. What do you propose?" "Program something harder. Your choice." Vex Thor's confidence surged back. "Computer, load program Vex Thor 13. Authorization code Theta-77. Chikrik made a strangled sound. "Commander, that's a black tier program. It's designed for special forces training. Multiple targets, extreme ranges, active countermeasures." She asked for harder. I'm simply accommodating. The range transformed into a nightmare scenario. Hostile environment. Simulated, but with environmental effects that were entirely real. Targets appeared at ranges from 10 meters to 400. Some moved in unpredictable patterns, others were partially obscured. The program included active countermeasures, strobing lights, sonic interference, even holographic decoys designed to confuse targeting systems. Vexathor had completed this program exactly 3 times in his career, and he was considered one of the best shots in the Imperial Guard. "After you," he said magnanimously. "I insist." She studied the range for longer this time, maybe 20 seconds. Then she did something strange. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. When she opened them, she stepped up to the line and raised her weapon. What happened next would be analyzed by military instructors for years afterward. She moved through the program like water flowing downhill, following the path of least resistance, but somehow reaching every target anyway. Her stance shifted constantly, adapting to angles and positions that maximized her limited fields of fire. She used cover when targets appeared behind obstacles, timing her shots to catch them in momentary gaps. When strobing lights activated, she fired during the dark intervals, using the rhythm rather than fighting it. At one point, a target appeared at nearly 300 meters, partially obscured, moving laterally. It should have been nearly impossible with her weapon. The bullet would drop significantly at that range. Wind effects would be magnified, and the target's movement meant leading it perfectly. She fired without hesitation. Hit. The sonic interference, designed to confuse auditory sensors and hearing-based targeting systems, didn't affect her at all. She wasn't relying on sound. The holographic decoys that could fool basic AI systems were ignored completely. Somehow, she distinguished real targets from fakes in milliseconds. When the program ended, her score wasn't quite perfect. She'd missed 2 out of 35 targets. But for an unaugmented being using manual weapons, it was almost supernatural. The crowd wasn't silent this time. There were murmurs, conversations in a dozen languages, everyone trying to process what they'd witnessed. Vexathor stared at the readout, his 4 hands frozen in position. You're using some kind of hidden augmentation. There's no other explanation." "I'm not." "Then you hacked the targeting system, modified the program somehow." "I didn't. This is impossible. No baseline organics should be able to—" "Your turn, Commander." Vexathor activated his weapons with more force than necessary. Fine. He'd simply have to demonstrate the superiority of augmented accuracy so thoroughly that there could be no doubt. His pride demanded it. He attacked the program with everything he had. His neural implants burned hot, processing data at maximum capacity. His 4 arms moved in perfect coordination, engaging multiple targets simultaneously. His stabilizers kept his aim true even while moving. His predictive algorithms ran probability matrices that bordered on precognition. It was his best performance ever. Perfect score. Time, 47.3 seconds. The human had taken 51.8 seconds and missed 2 targets. He'd won. Objectively, mathematically, undeniably won. So why did it feel hollow? "Satisfied?" he asked, knowing he sounded petulant and hating himself for it. "You're very good," she said simply. "Your technology is impressive. But when your technology fails, what do you have left?" "It doesn't fail. These systems have redundancy protocols, backup power, fault tolerance. Everything fails eventually." Vexathor opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Around him, other shooters were looking thoughtful. The Thoraxian, who lived for logic and mathematics, was studying his own augmented rifle with a contemplative expression. Even Chakrik seemed less certain than usual. "One more test," Vexathor said suddenly. "Quick draw, simple scenario, single target 20 meters. First person to register a hit wins. Pure speed and accuracy." She raised an eyebrow. "That's your specialty. Neural-linked quick response is literally what your implants are designed for." Are you declining? Just pointing out you've rigged the game in your favor. Then you should have no problem admitting defeat when I win. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. All right, let's do it. They positioned themselves facing a single target at 20 meters. The rules were simple. The computer would generate a random signal, visual, auditory, or both. First person to draw and hit the target after the signal would win. Vex Thor's neural implants could process the signal and trigger his motor response in literally 0.003 seconds. No organic being could match that. Computer, standard randomized quick draw protocol, Vex Thor commanded. 3-second countdown, then random signal. They stood ready. Vex Thor with all 4 arms prepared, his weapons held low but ready to snap up in a fraction of a second. The human with her primitive pistol holstered at her hip, her hand relaxed at her side. 3. Vex Thor's targeting implants came online, his processors spinning up to maximum. 2. His stabilizers engaged, his probability matrices running scenarios. 1. Every system synchronized, a symphony of technology awaiting the conductor's signal. The signal came, an auditory tone, pure and clear. Vex Thor's neural implants registered it in 3 milliseconds. His motor response triggered. His 4 arms moved with mechanical precision. His weapons came up, targeting systems locking onto the silhouette downrange. He was fast. By every measurable standard, he was impossibly, inhumanly fast. The human shot rang out first. The impact registered on the target a full 0.017 seconds before Vex Thor's particle accelerators even finished their firing sequence. Silence. Not the murmuring kind, or the thoughtful kind. The absolute shocked silence of people watching their understanding of reality get casually dismantled. Vex Thor stood frozen, his weapons still raised, his processors still running analysis on what had just happened. According to his implants, she should have been slower. Had to be slower. The human nervous system couldn't process signals as fast as his augmented neural pathways. It was biological fact. How? He finally managed. She holstered her weapon. You waited for the signal to register before you moved. Of course I did. That's how quick draw works. No, that's how you've trained to work. You let your technology handle the sensing, processing, and response triggering. Your body is downstream of your augmentation. That makes me faster. It makes you dependent. You've optimized for a computer-mediated response loop. She tapped her temple. I just watched you. Saw the tension in your stance building before the signal. Read your body language. You were anticipating the 3-count pattern. I started my draw while you were still in the processing phase. You can't predict a random signal. I didn't predict the signal. I predicted you. The implications of that landed like a physical blow. Vex Thor's probability matrices tried to analyze it, running scenarios, but kept returning incomplete results. She'd essentially hacked his response loop not through technology, but through observation and timing. A Thoraxian stepped forward from the crowd, its crystalline voice chiming with scientific curiosity. Human, would you consent to a medical scan? This collective would very much like to verify that you possess no hidden augmentation. Sure. 10 minutes later, the results were displayed for everyone to see. The human was baseline, completely, entirely, almost aggressively baseline. No neural implants, no probability processors, no stabilizers. The most advanced technology in her body was dental work that any collective citizen would consider primitive. This is fascinating, the Thoraxian announced. Her performance appears to derive entirely from neuroplasticity, pattern recognition, and what her species calls muscle memory. Essentially, she has optimized her organic systems through repetition and adaptation rather than technological enhancement. But that's impossible, someone in the crowd protested. Organic beings have limits, response times, processing speeds, accuracy. These are biological constraints. Constraints that humanity apparently trains within rather than around, the Thoraxian replied. Observe. Her sustained accuracy under variable conditions actually exceeds prediction. She's not calculating wind effects. She's learned to feel them through environmental cues. She's not processing target distance mathematically. She's developed intuitive range estimation through experience. Her brain has formed neural pathways that approximate computational results through pattern matching. Vexithor listened to this analysis with growing discomfort. You're saying she's turned herself into a biological computer? No, the human interjected. I've trained to be good at shooting. There's a difference. But without enhancement, you should what? Be helpless? That's what you've all become. So dependent on technology that you've forgotten how to actually learn physical skills. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. It was one thing to lose a competition. It was another to have your entire species' approach to skill development questioned. Chikrik spoke up, his voice thoughtful. Commander, do you remember the survival courses we took in Academy before we received our augmentations? Vaguely. They were difficult. They were nearly impossible because we were expected to perform tasks that our biology wasn't optimized for. But after augmentation, they became routine. He looked at the human. What she's suggesting is that her species never stopped developing the baseline skills. They couldn't rely on technology to compensate. So they pushed their organic limitations through training. Exactly, she said. Every human soldier learns manual marksmanship. We train until the weapon becomes an extension of our body. We learn to read environments, predict movements, adapt to changing conditions. Not because we're trying to be heroes or prove a point. Because that's how you develop actual competence. Vexthor's mandibles worked silently. Every instinct screamed at him to reject this. His augmentations were superior. They had to be. The entire collective structure was built on technological advancement as the path to excellence. But he couldn't deny what he'd witnessed. So, what you're saying, he finally managed, is that we've made ourselves weaker by becoming stronger. I'm saying you've made yourself dependent. There's a difference between using tools and needing them. She paused. Your technology is impressive, Commander. But what happens when it glitches? When you're in a situation where your implants can't function? When you face an enemy who doesn't play by your technological rules? Those are unlikely scenarios. Unlikely isn't impossible. And in combat, unlikely scenarios have a habit of becoming reality at the worst possible moment. A Vorentine officer pushed through the crowd. Senior Commander Teclax, Vexthor recognized with a sinking feeling. Teclax commanded the station's special operations training programs and was legendarily difficult to impress. Human, Teclax said, her clicking voice sharp with interest. Your species maintains baseline combat training protocols? Yes, ma'am. All military personnel train with manual weapons before advancing to assisted systems. And this training is effective. Humans have successfully operated in 17 different combat zones since joining the collective. We've taken casualties, but our performance has been consistent despite technological disadvantages. Teclax's antennae twitched, the Vorentine equivalent of a thoughtful expression. Commander Vexthor, you're temporarily relieved of training duties. Effective immediately, you'll be consulting with our human allies here on baseline competency protocols. Commander, That wasn't a request. If our forces are overdependent on technology, that represents a critical vulnerability, one that needs addressing. Teclax turned to the human. I'll need you to document your training methods. Target practice, situational awareness, manual calculation techniques, everything. Of course, Commander. And I'll want demonstrations. For all combat specialties, not just marksmanship. The human nodded once, crisp and professional. Vex Thor stood there, his forearms hanging uselessly, watching his certainties crumble. Around him, the crowd was dispersing, but he could hear the conversations. Questions about baseline training, discussions of over-reliance on augmentation. Someone was already pulling up historical combat data, running analyses on performance degradation during technological failures. The human began packing her equipment, moving with that same economical efficiency. Vex Thor found himself approaching almost against his will. "You planned this," he said. She looked up. "Planned what?" "This entire demonstration. You knew you'd attract attention, knew someone would challenge you, knew you'd make us question ourselves." "I came here to practice, Commander. You're the one who turned it into a competition." "But you knew how it would look. A human outperforming augmented soldiers with primitive weapons." She finished securing her bag and stood. "I'm not trying to prove humans are superior. We're not. Your technology is amazing. Your augmentations work. But you've forgotten that the technology should serve the warrior, not replace them. And you think you can teach us that? I think someone needs to. Because one day, you're going to face an enemy who disables your systems, takes out your implants, destroys your technological advantage. And on that day, you'd better know how to fight without them." She walked past him toward the exit. At the kind doorway, she paused. "For what it's worth, Commander, you're actually very good. Your natural talent is obvious, even through all the tech. If you learn to trust yourself as much as you trust your implants, you'd be exceptional." Then she was gone, leaving Vex Thor alone with his thoughts and his suddenly questionable augmentations. Chikrik approached cautiously. "Commander, I completed that program perfectly. Perfect score, faster time." "Yes, sir." "So I won." "Technically, sir." "Technically." Vex Thor looked at his 4 hands, at the silver traces of his neural implants, at the weapons systems that represented the pinnacle of collective technology. "Chikrik, schedule me for baseline marksmanship training. No augmentation assistance." "Sir?" "If I'm going to teach others, I should probably learn it myself first." "That's very wise, Commander." "And Chikrik? Find out what other skills humans train without technological assistance. Combat forms, navigation, tactical planning, all of it." "You think there's something to learn?" Vex Thor thought about the human's calm confidence. The way she'd moved through impossible scenarios with nothing but trained skill and hard-earned experience. The shot that had beaten his augmented quick draw through nothing more than observation and timing. "I think," he said slowly, "that we've been so focused on transcending our limitations that we forgot to master them first. And that might be the most dangerous weakness of all." Across the station, in dozens of training facilities, warriors who had spent their entire lives relying on technology began asking uncomfortable questions. By the next day, baseline training protocols would be in development. Within a month, every military academy in the collective would be reviewing their augmentation-dependent curricula. And it had all started because one human showed up with a primitive weapon and the quiet confidence of someone who knew, truly knew, what they were doing. The galaxy was learning an old lesson that Earth had never forgotten. Before you can enhance ability, you need to develop it. Technology should amplify skill, not replace it. And sometimes, the most advanced solution is remembering how to do things the hard way first. Vexthor looked at his weapons, his implants, his augmentations. Then he powered them all down and walked toward the basic training facilities, ready to learn what it meant to actually be skilled. Pride was a terrible teacher. But humility, it turned out, was an excellent starting point.